It always starts quietly. No warning, no alarm, just a small dot drifting across a screen in the middle of the night. Far beyond the ecliptic, where most things never wander, something appeared. At first, it didn't look special. Just another faint smudge of light, buried in data, barely brighter than the background stars. The kind of thing astronomers see every week and forget by morning. But this one didn't behave like the others. It was moving too fast. Not rushing, not streaking. Just wrong. Suddenly wrong. Its path cut across the solar system at an angle that made scientists pause. Not along the flat disk where planets live, not where comets usually come from. It came from above, from below, from somewhere outside the usual story. They gave it a name, like they always do. A simple label. Cold, clinical. 3I/Atlas, the third known interstellar object ever seen passing through our system. At first, the reaction was calm, professional, measured. Interstellar objects aren't impossible. We've seen two before. Strange visitors, yes, but explainable. So this should have been routine. But then the numbers came in. The speed didn't slow the way it should have. Gravity pulled, but not enough. The object kept its pace, like it had somewhere to be. Its trajectory traced backward pointed to empty space. No nearby star, no known system, no obvious home, just darkness. Still, no one panicked. Science doesn't panic. Science double-checks. Data from Atlas was sent out. Other observatories joined in. Chile, Hawaii, Europe, different skies, different instruments. Same result. The object was real, and it was early. Too early. 3I/8ALAS had entered our solar system long before anyone noticed. It had already crossed invisible borders we never thought to guard. That's when the quiet question began to form. Where did it really come from? Because natural objects usually leave clues, dust trails, gas clouds, a history written in ice and rock. But 3I/ATLAS was clean, no long tail, no messy debris, just a solid point of light, holding itself together as it raced toward the sun. Some called it a comet. Others hesitated. Comets flare, they shed, they react. This thing stayed calm. Its brightness changed, but not wildly, not randomly. It was as if it was choosing when to shine. The first light curve arrived a few days later, a graph most people would never notice. Just lines, rises and falls. But to the scientists watching, it felt like staring at a heartbeat on a screen. The curve didn't wobble like tumbling rock. It pulsed, not fast, not slow, steady. Too steady. They ran the math again. Rotation? Maybe. Shape? Possibly long, thin, strange. Still, nothing that screamed danger. And yet, no one could quite relax. Because every known object follows rules written by chaos. They spin unevenly. They reflect light poorly. They don't care who's watching. But 3I/ATLAS felt, aware of itself, not alive, not intelligent, just controlled. In the days that followed, the object grew brighter as it moved closer to the sun. Still no tail. Still no violent reaction to heat. It passed through regions filled with solar wind like it barely noticed. Some researchers joked. Nervous jokes. Best behaved comet we've ever seen. Others stayed quiet, because the silence was louder than laughter. Late one night, a young analyst noticed something small. So small it almost got dismissed. When they adjusted the data for distance and angle, the reflectivity didn't match rock or ice. It was higher, not metal high, not mirror high, but Ron high, as if the surface was smoother than expected. Cleaner, the kind of surface erosion usually destroys over millions of years. Yet here it was, intact. A traveler from another star system, untouched by time. Or built to survive it. That thought never made it into official notes. Not yet, but it stayed in the room, hovering. 3I/Atlas crossed the ecliptic soon after, passed through the plane of the planets like a needle through cloth. No hesitation, no curve, just a clean cut. That's when more eyes started watching. Because crossing the ecliptic isn't rare, but doing it at that speed, on that angle, with that control, that was unusual. The sun pulled harder now. Gravity tightened its grip. And still, the object didn't behave like it should. No sudden spin, no violent outgassing, just calm motion, purposeful. Like it knew the math better than we did. News of 3I/Atlas stayed mostly within scientific circles at first. No headlines, no panic, just quiet emails. Late-night calls. What do you think it is? I don't know. Does it bother you? Yes. Because discovery isn't always exciting. Sometimes it's unsettling. Sometimes it feels like finding footprints on a beach you thought was empty. The official story stayed simple. A rare, interstellar object. Unusual but natural. Yet behind the scenes, something had shifted. The language changed. Words like odd turned into anomalous. Interesting became concerning. Not dangerous, just unknown. And unknown is the hardest thing for science to accept. Because the universe is vast but familiar, stars burn, planets form, comets fall apart. We know the rhythm. But 3I/Atlas didn't follow the rhythm. It moved to its own beat. As days passed, simulations tried to predict its future. Where it would go, how it would leave. Some models failed completely, others worked barely. Each one came with a margin of error that felt too wide, like guessing the path of something that could change its mind. No one said that out loud. Not yet. But the question was there, growing heavier with each update. If this thing isn't from here, if it didn't form the way others did, then what made it? Was it a relic? A fragment of some ancient event beyond our galaxy? Or something else entirely? Something sent? Something passing through? Something that noticed us, even if only for a moment. As 3I/Atlas continued its silent journey inward, the sky looked the same to everyone else. Stars still burned. Planets still moved. Life went on. But somewhere, on quiet screens in dark rooms, people watched a dot of light move closer and wondered if discovery had just changed its meaning forever. Because the object wasn't just approaching the sun, it was approaching certainty. And whatever came next would no longer be routine. The closer it came to the sun, the less sense it made. At first, the path of 3I/Atlas looked simple enough. A fast object, a steep angle, a clean curve shaped by gravity, the kind of motion every astronomer learns to predict. You draw the line. You run the math. You wait for reality to match the model. But this time, reality didn't listen. As 3I/Atlas moved inward toward perihelion, the sun's pull grew stronger. That part was expected. Gravity always wins in the end. Except it didn't. The object's path began to drift. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to be uncomfortable. A fraction of a degree. A tiny sideways nudge, so small that one observatory dismissed it as error. Then another observatory saw the same thing. Then another. Different telescopes, different software. Same result. The predicted path and the real path were no longer the same. Scientists recalculated. Maybe solar radiation pressure, they said. Light pushing against the surface. That happens with comets, so they adjusted for it. Still wrong. Then they added outgassing models. Jets of gas escaping unevenly, pushing the object slightly off course. That happens too. But there was a problem. 3I/Atlas wasn't releasing enough gas. No visible jets, no wild flares, nothing strong enough to explain the shift. Yet the shift continued. Small deviations became measurable ones, the kind that make people sit up straighter in their chairs, the kind that make conversations slow down, because gravity is honest. It doesn't lie. It doesn't improvise. If something moves against it, there has to be a reason. The sun pulled, the planets tugged, and 3I/Atlas responded, but not completely. It was as if the object was slightly correcting itself, not fighting gravity, not escaping it, just refusing to fall exactly where it should. Some described it as a non-gravitational acceleration, a cold term. But behind that phrase was a warmer, uneasy feeling. This thing was not a passive rock. Night after night, the models were updated, and night after night, reality slipped just outside the error bars. Never enough to cause alarm. Always enough to raise an eyebrow. Then, a simulation failed entirely. One long-term projection showed 3I/Atlas drifting into a path it had already passed. The model folded back on itself. That doesn't happen unless the assumptions are wrong. And when assumptions fail, you don't fix the math. You question the object. Emails started coming in later at night. Short ones. Are you seeing this too? Yes. Any ideas? No. Because every known natural explanation left a fingerprint. Outgassing leaves dust. Radiation pressure depends on shape. Gravitational interactions follow clean rules. But 3I/Atlas left no fingerprints. Just motion. Smooth, quiet, controlled. The trajectory curved in ways that looked intentional, not sharply, not obviously. Just enough to stay on its own path. One researcher described it as threading the needle, avoiding extremes, avoiding chaos, like a traveler who knew exactly how close to get and when to pull away. The sun was now bright in its frame, heat rising, radiation pouring in. This is where comets usually come alive. They crack, they flare, they lose pieces of themselves. But 3I/Atlas stayed composed, its path adjusted again. A subtle lateral move, barely visible unless you overlaid multiple nights of data. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Some called it coincidence, statistical noise. After all, space is messy, but noise doesn't repeat itself so cleanly. And coincidence doesn't show up on every dataset. The deviations lined up, same direction, same scale, as if something was constantly nudging the object, keeping it centered, keeping it safe. The phrase guided trajectory appeared in a draft paper. It was removed before submission. Too loaded, too dangerous. Because guidance implies choice, and choice implies agency. Still, the idea spread quietly. Not in headlines, not in press releases, in pauses, in the way scientists hesitated before speaking, in the way they stared at the same graph longer than necessary. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, when one analyst ran the numbers backward. If 3I/Atlas continued correcting its path this way, its route through the solar system looked oddly efficient. Minimal risk. Minimal exposure. A path that avoided deep gravitational traps. A path that skimmed danger without falling into it. Like it knew where not to go. That realization changed the tone of the room. Because natural objects don't plan ahead. They tumble, they fall, they react. They don't optimize. But this object, it was optimizing. The sun loomed closer now. Perihelion approached. The point of no return. And still, 3I/Atlas held its line. No sudden panic, no chaotic shift. Just calm emotion through intense force. Somewhere between awe and discomfort. A thought surfaced. What if gravity isn't the only hand on the wheel? What if this traveler is responding to something else? Internal mass shifting? Unknown physics? Or something far more unsettling? A system that can sense, calculate, adjust. Not thinking, not feeling, just functioning. Like a machine built to cross stars. That idea never left the lab, but it stayed in people's heads. Because once you imagine it, every deviation feels heavier, every curve feels deliberate, every correction feels like a choice. As perihelion drew closer, the room grew quieter. No one wanted to say it, but everyone felt it. The path of 3I/Atlas wasn't just wrong, it was purposeful. And if gravity alone wasn't guiding it, then something else was. Something ancient, something distant, something that had already passed through systems like ours before. The object continued inward, silent and steady. And for the first time since its discovery, the question changed. Not, what is it? But, what does it want to avoid? And more importantly, what happens when it no longer needs to? The data didn't arrive with drama, no alarms, no flashing warnings, just a file, quietly uploaded, time-stamped, ordinary. It was the light curve, a simple record of how bright 3I/Atlas appeared over time. For most objects in space, a light curve tells a simple story. A rock spins, light hits it, brightness rises and falls, messy, uneven, imperfect, chaos written in lines. That's what scientists expected. That's not what they saw. At first glance, the curve looked calm. Too calm. The brightness rose, then fell, then rose again. Not randomly, not jagged, smooth, measured, like a breath. Someone zoomed in. The pattern didn't break. Another observatory sent their data. Same shape, different telescope, different angle, same rhythm. That's when the room got quiet. Because natural objects don't agree with each other like that. They wobble. They stutter. They surprise you. This didn't. The reflectivity of 3I/Atlas changed with precision. as if the surface was turning in exact steps, not tumbling, not shaking, rotating cleanly. They tried to explain it. Maybe it was long and thin, they said. A strange shape could create a smooth curve, so they modeled it. Cigar-shaped, pancake-shaped, even hollow. None of it fit. The curve was too perfect. Every rise in brightness matched the last. Every fall returned to the same baseline. No drift, no decay, just repetition. One scientist described it quietly. It's like watching a lighthouse without the ocean. Another data set came in, then another. Different nights, different distances from the sun. Still the same pattern. As 3IATLAS moved closer, the amplitude changed slightly. Expected. But the timing? Unchanged. The pulse stayed steady. That shouldn't happen. Heat affects materials. Radiation roughens surfaces. Time erodes order. But this object didn't lose its rhythm. If anything, it refined it. The light curve wasn't breaking down. It was sharpening. At some point, someone overlaid the curves from different weeks. They lined up perfectly. That's when the phrase slipped out. Broken light curve. Not because it was damaged, but because it broke expectations. Because it refused to behave like chaos. Because it acted like it had rules. A rule for when to shine. A rule for when to dim. As if parts of its surface were changing reflectivity on purpose. Dark, light, dark again. Not random patches of ice and rock, but zones, defined regions. One researcher asked a simple question. What if it's not spinning? The room paused, because spin explains most light curves. No spin means no easy answer. They tested it. Assumed minimal rotation. The curve still didn't collapse, which meant the brightness wasn't just about shape. It was about surface behavior. The object was doing something, not violently, not dramatically, just precisely. That idea made people uncomfortable, because space is loud. Solar winds scream. Particles slam into surfaces at insane speeds. Objects out there are scarred, pitted, uneven. But 3I/Atlas behaved like it was sheltered, or shielded, or maintained. The word reflectivity kept coming up. Its albedo, how much light it bounced back, was changing, not degrading, not fading, adjusting, up, down, always returning to balance. Someone joked again. Nervous humor. Maybe it likes the spotlight. No one laughed, because humor works when fear is low, and fear was growing. They compared the curve to known bodies. Asteroids, comets, debris. Nothing matched. They even compared it to spacecraft. Defunct satellites. Spent rocket stages. The resemblance was closer. Too close. But the speed, the trajectory, the origin, none of it fit human technology. So the comparison stopped. Still, the thought lingered. What kind of object keeps such tight control over how it reflects light, not emits, not flashes, just reflects, like a mirror that turns itself, like a surface that knows where the sun is and chooses how to respond? The sun grew brighter in its frame. Heat increased. Radiation intensified. This should have damaged the pattern. It didn't. The curve stayed clean. One senior scientist leaned back and said nothing for a long time, then quietly asked, "Have we ever seen this before?" No one answered, because the answer was no. Never. Not like this. The light curve wasn't just data anymore. It felt like behavior, like a signature, a rhythm that belonged to something built, not formed. Some pushed back strongly. "We're projecting," they said. "Patterns emerge when you stare long enough." And they were right. Humans are good at seeing meaning. Too good, so they tried to break it. They injected noise into the models. They accounted for sensor drift. They assumed errors. Still, the pattern survived. Cleaned of assumptions, it was still there. And worse, it was consistent. Consistency is rare in space. Consistency means design, or something very close to it. The word artificial hovered just outside official language, unspoken, heavy, because once you say it, you can't take it back. The light curve became the center of everything. More eyes watched it than the object itself. Because motion can deceive. Brightness doesn't lie. It records interaction. It shows how an object meets the universe. And 3IATLAS met it, deliberately. Night after night, the curve repeated, like a heartbeat, like a signal pretending not to be one. Some asked the hardest question of all. What if this isn't about how it looks? What if it's about who might be watching it? Because reflectivity doesn't just affect us. It affects visibility. Who can see you? From where? And when? The idea was disturbing. That this object might be controlling how noticeable it was. Bright enough to be found, quiet enough to avoid attention. A balance, as if discovery itself was part of the plan, or the risk. As 3I/Atlas continued its approach, the light curve kept shining its quiet truth. Order where there should have been chaos. Control where randomness should rule. And somewhere between the lines of data, a realization settled in. This wasn't just an object passing through our system. It was something with rules. Rules we didn't write. Rules we didn't understand. And if the light curve was broken, maybe it was never meant for us to read it at all. Maybe it was meant for someone else. And we were only seeing it by accident. The brightness rose again, then fell, perfectly on time. And with every pulse, the question grew louder. What kind of traveler crosses the stars and remembers how to shine? At first, they almost missed it, because space is noisy. Data flickers, signals jump, cosmic rays punch holes through clean numbers. Every astronomer learns this early. You don't trust the first strange thing you see. You wait. So when the brightness of 3I/Atlas showed tiny spikes buried in the data, no one panicked. They labeled it what they always do: noise, random interference, a glitch in the stream, something to smooth out later. But the spikes didn't go away. They came back the next night, and the night after that, always small, always brief, but always on time. At first, it was subtle, a rise in brightness, lasting seconds, then silence. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never notice. But one analyst was. They were comparing datasets from different observatories. Routine work, boring work. When something felt off. The timestamps lined up, not roughly, not approximately, exactly. The same brief rise, at the same interval, recorded by telescopes thousands of miles apart. Different skies, different equipment. Same moment, That shouldn't happen. So they checked again. Maybe the clocks were synced wrong. Maybe the software rounded numbers. They recalibrated everything. Still there. The spikes weren't drifting. They weren't smearing. They were repeating. Like a heartbeat hiding under static. Someone plotted them on a separate graph. And that's when it became impossible to ignore. The noise sharpened. The spikes lined up into a pattern. Pulse, pause, pulse. Over and over and over again. Not fast enough to be a flicker. Not slow enough to be random. Steady, relentless, a rhythm. The room changed. People leaned closer to screens. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Because this wasn't just brightness anymore. It was timing. Timing is dangerous. Timing suggests structure. Natural systems drift. They wobble. They lose precision. But this pulse didn't. It held its beat across hours, across days, across continents. Someone whispered it before thinking. It's keeping time. No one corrected them. They checked solar activity. Solar flares can mess with instruments. Nothing matched. They checked Earth-based interference, satellites, radio noise, clean. They checked atmospheric effects, still clean. The pulse wasn't coming from us. It wasn't coming from the sun. It was coming from the object, 3I/Atlas. Every time it rotated, or whatever it was doing, the signal appeared. Not as a broadcast, not as a beam, just a subtle increase in reflectivity. Like a wink, like a tap on the glass. Pulse. Silence. Pulse. Some tried to stay calm. It's probably a rotational harmonic, they said. A strange shape causing brief alignment. That explanation works, until it doesn't, because the pulse didn't change with distance. As 3I/Atlas moved closer to the sun, the interval stayed the same. Heat didn't affect it. Radiation didn't stretch it. Time didn't wear it down. The pulse was immune to conditions, as if it existed independent of space around it. That idea made people uncomfortable, because independence is rare in nature. They overlaid the pulse timing with the light curve from earlier. The alignment was perfect. The object wasn't just shining, it was scheduling. One scientist laughed quietly, a dry laugh. That's not how rocks behave. No one argued. Across continents, teams started watching specifically for the pulse. They stopped smoothing it out. They stopped filtering it away. They let it exist. And the more they watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't noise pretending to be order. It was order pretending to be noise, hidden just deep enough that no one would see it by accident, unless they were already paying attention. That thought spread quietly. If this thing wanted to hide, it could have. If it wanted to shine brightly, it could have. Instead, it chose the middle, visible but undeniable. A pulse so small you could explain it away, but so precise you couldn't forget it. The interval became the focus, measured again and again. It wasn't tied to any known natural cycle. Not rotation, not orbital period. It didn't match the sun's rhythms. It matched nothing except itself, which raised a chilling possibility. This wasn't reacting to the universe. The universe was reacting to it. The pulse became a quiet obsession. Late nights, cold coffee. People began to feel like they were listening, not observing, listening for something that wasn't sound, just time, just repetition, just patience. Someone asked a question no one wanted to answer. What if it's not a signal? The room waited. What if it's a clock? A clock doesn't speak. It doesn't announce itself. It just marks moments, over and over. Why would something crossing the stars need to keep time? That question hung in the air, because timekeeping implies duration. Travel. Long journeys. Journeys where knowing when matters. As perihelion approached, the pulse didn't speed up. It didn't slow down. It stayed loyal to its beat, as if whatever set it did so long ago, far away, under different stars. Some suggested it could be internal, a thermal cycle, expansion and contraction. But thermal systems drift, they decay. They don't keep perfect time across changing environments. This one did. And then came the most unsettling realization. The pulse wasn't just visible to us. Anyone watching from anywhere could see it. A universal marker. A blinking light in the dark. Not screaming, not broadcasting, just existing. Like a lighthouse that doesn't care who's looking or why. The word signal crept into conversations again. Still unofficial, still whispered, because calling it a signal means assuming intent. And intent opens doors we don't know how to close. The data kept coming. Pulse after pulse, night after night. The universe stayed silent, but the object didn't. And in that silence, something shifted inside the people watching. Because randomness comforts us. Randomness means no one is in control. But this was control without communication. Order without explanation. Time kept by something that should not care about time at all. As 3I/Atlas continued its silent journey inward, the pulse stayed with it, a quiet companion, a steady reminder that somewhere out there, something might be counting. Not seconds, not days, but encounters, passages, systems crossed, and maybe witnesses. The pulse appeared again, right on time. And for the first time since its discovery, the question wasn't about physics. It was about intention. Is this just an echo of strange natural laws we don't understand yet? Or is something out there, keeping time, waiting for a moment we haven't reached yet? The data didn't answer. It just pulsed again and again. And somewhere deep down, everyone watching felt the same quiet thought. Clocks are built for a reason. And this one was still running. Heat is honest. In space, heat tells the truth. When an object moves closer to the sun, it warms up. When it moves away, it cools down. Simple, reliable, unforgiving. Every comet follows that rule. Until this one didn't. When the first thermal readings from 3IATLAS came in, no one reacted. Not at first. The numbers looked normal almost. A slight rise in temperature as it approached the sun. But then, something strange happened. The temperature dropped. Not slowly, not gently. It dipped, while the sun was still getting closer. That made no sense. Maybe a sensor error, someone said. Thermal instruments are sensitive, so they checked another dataset. Same dip. Another observatory confirmed it. Different instrument. Different calibration. Same result. 3I/Atlas was cooling down, while moving into stronger sunlight. The room went quiet again, because this wasn't subtle. This wasn't buried noise. This was a clear shift. They waited. Maybe the object had released gas. Outgassing can cause cooling. But there was no plume, no tail, nothing escaping into space. Then, just as suddenly, the temperature rose again, back to where models said it should be, almost perfectly. Cool, warm, balanced. A cycle. Someone overlaid the thermal data with the pulse timing. The alignment made their stomach drop. The cooling phase appeared between pulses. The warming phase followed. Not exactly synced, but close enough to feel intentional. This wasn't random heating. It was modulation. Like the object was letting heat in, then pushing it away, managing it. That word felt dangerous. Managing implies control. Control implies design. Comets don't manage heat. They suffer it. They crack. They boil. They fall apart. 3I/Atlas did none of that. As it approached perihelion, solar radiation intensified. This is where comets become chaotic. Jets erupt. Surfaces fracture. But thermal sensors showed stability. The temperature never spiked beyond a narrow range, almost like there was a limit, a ceiling, as if the object refused to get hotter and refused to get colder. One researcher said it quietly. It's regulating. No one laughed. They ran simulations again, assumed exotic materials, ultra-dense ice, strange alloys. None fully explained it, because even exotic materials respond to heat. They don't correct themselves. This thing did. The thermal pattern repeated. Cool, warm, cool again, not tied to rotation, not tied to distance alone. It followed its own internal rhythm. Like breathing, like a system cycling energy through itself. Someone suggested internal cavities, hollow spaces that vent heat inward, but that would still leave traces. Infrared signatures, hot spots. There were none. The surface stayed uniform, too uniform. That was the problem. Uniformity is rare in space. Even planets have hot sides and cold sides. This object didn't. It behaved like it was insulated, shielded, or actively adjusting its surface properties. The phrase, thermal control system, appeared on a whiteboard, then got erased. Too specific, too real, because once you say system, you imply intention. Still, the idea wouldn't leave. Across continents, scientists stared at the same graphs. Different languages, same silence. Because this wasn't just odd behavior. It was efficient behavior. No wasted energy. No dramatic reaction, just smooth regulation. As if the object knew exactly how much heat it could tolerate and never crossed that line. That raised another question. Why does it care? Natural objects don't care if they melt. They just do. But this one seemed invested in staying intact, in staying functional. That word surfaced quietly. Functional. What function requires precise temperature control, not survival? Not geology. Function suggests purpose. As 3I/Atlas moved deeper into the sun's influence, the thermal cycle tightened. Shorter cooling phases, sharper warm-ups, always returning to balance, never drifting, never failing. Someone overlaid the thermal curve with the light curve again. The resemblance was uncomfortable, different data, same behavior. Rise, fall, repeat, different senses, same rhythm. Like multiple systems working together, not reacting, coordinating. That's when the mood shifted. Up to this point, everything strange could still be argued away. Rare, unlikely, but possible. This felt different. This felt engineered, not in a human way, not with bolts and panels, but with principles, rules, boundaries. One scientist said something that stuck. If we designed something to cross stars, we'd protect it from heat first. No one replied, because the thought was too clear. Heat is the enemy of long journeys. Heat destroys structure. Heat shortens lifespan. Any traveler that lasts millions of years must master heat. And 3I/Atlas had. The data kept coming. The object neared perihelion. The sun blazed. Solar radiation surged. Still, no runaway heating. Just calm control. That's when people stopped calling it strange. They started calling it unsettling. Because this wasn't a fluke. This wasn't a single odd measurement. This was a pattern. A thermal pattern that felt deliberate, as if the object was actively deciding when to absorb energy and when to reject it, like it was wearing a coat and adjusting the zipper. The most chilling part came later, when someone asked what happens after perihelion. Comets usually cool rapidly once they move away. But if 3I/Atlas was regulating heat, would it keep doing so? Would the pattern continue, even when it no longer needed protection? Or was this cycle only active during exposure, only when someone might be watching? That question had no answer, but it changed how people looked at the data, because now the object wasn't just passing through heat. It was responding to it, intelligently, or at least effectively. And effectiveness over cosmic distances is never accidental. As the sun filled more of the sky behind it, 3I/Atlas stayed quiet. No flare, no scream, just balance. Just control. Just a steady refusal to behave like anything we had ever seen. By the end of the week, no one said comet anymore. They said object, neutral, safe. But everyone felt the same thing. This wasn't dead rock. It wasn't alive either. It was something in between. A system, a traveler that knew how to protect itself. And if it could manage heat, what else could it manage? Energy is the foundation of everything. Control energy, and you control behavior. As 3I/Atlas continued its silent approach, the thermal data told a quiet story, not of chaos, not of survival, but of intention wrapped in silence. Something out there wasn't just enduring the sun. It was negotiating with it. And for the first time, the question shifted again. Not, how is it staying intact? But, what was it built to survive next? When scientists talk about surfaces in space, they usually mean scars, pits, cracks, burn marks left by radiation and time. Nothing out there stays clean for long. So when new surface data from 3I/Atlas arrived, no one expected surprises. They expected damage. Instead, they saw behavior. As the object rotated, or whatever motion it was making, parts of its surface began to change. Not slowly, not randomly. Sections darkened, other sections brightened, like a pattern moving across skin. At first, it looked like shadow, a trick of angle and light. That happens all the time, but the angles didn't match. The sun was fixed. The observer was fixed, yet the reflectivity shifted anyway. Bright, dim, bright again, in places that shouldn't be changing at all. They mapped the surface into regions, grid by grid, and that's when it became clear. These weren't natural variations. They were boundaries, clean edges, defined zones. One patch absorbed light, another reflected it sharply. Then, as the object continued its motion, those patches moved, not drifting, not smearing, switching, like tiles turning over. Someone said it out loud before they could stop themselves. It looks like skin, not skin like flesh, skin like function. A surface that responds, a surface that adapts. The reflectivity wasn't fixed. It was conditional. When a region faced the sun, it brightened. When it turned away, it darkened. That sounds normal until you realize how fast it happened. Too fast for rock. Too clean for ice. Natural materials don't switch states on command. They warm slowly. They cool slowly. They don't flip. This surface did. The change wasn't just brightness. It was quality. Some areas reflected light sharply, almost mirror-like. Others scattered it softly, diffuse, controlled, as if different surface modes were being activated. The phrase adaptive reflectivity entered the conversation, then stalled, because that phrase belongs in engineering, not astronomy. They compared the behavior to known materials, metals, crystals, exotic compounds. Nothing fit perfectly. Even the most advanced human-made surfaces degrade in space. They flake. They peel. 3IATLAS didn't. The pattern held night after night, rotation after rotation. Always clean, always precise. The surface wasn't wearing down. It was operating. That realization made the room feel smaller. Because operation implies purpose, and purpose implies design. Someone tried to reframe it. Maybe it's layered ice, they said. Different compositions exposed as it spins. That explanation lasted about 5 minutes, because ice sublimates. It doesn't switch. And this switching wasn't gradual. It was binary. On, off, bright, dark, like shutters opening and closing. Another overlay was made. Surface reflectivity against thermal data. The match was unsettling. When sections darkened, heat absorption dropped. When they brightened, excess heat reflected away. The surface wasn't just changing. It was working with the thermal cycle, protecting the object, optimizing energy, a system within a system. No one smiled, because now the pieces were aligning. Pulse, thermal regulation, trajectory correction, and now a responsive surface. Each strange thing alone could be dismissed. Together, they formed something harder to ignore. A machine doesn't have to look like a machine. It just has to behave like one. Someone asked a quiet question. What if this is camouflage? The room stayed silent, because camouflage isn't about hiding completely. It's about control. Being visible when you want to be, invisible when you don't. The surface of 3I/Atlas seemed capable of both, bright enough to reflect sunlight, dark enough to disappear against space. That raised a darker thought. Maybe this object wasn't just protecting itself from the sun. Maybe it was managing who could see it. From where and when. The surface pattern wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't decorative. It was functional. Different zones activated at different times, like panels, like layers. The word design hovered in the air. No one wanted to say it. Design means intent. Intent means someone, somewhere, made choices. Choices imply origin, and origin leads to questions no one is ready to answer. As 3I/Atlas continued rotating, the pattern repeated, never drifting, never degrading. A surface that stayed young, unscarred, maintained. That alone was strange. Interstellar travel is brutal. Micrometeoroids, radiation, time, millions, maybe billions of years. Yet this surface looked fresh, as if it had been preserved, or repaired, or never exposed until recently. That last thought made some people uneasy. What if this object hadn't been traveling for eons? What if it had been waiting, stored, dormant, and only now activated? The reflectivity changes became more pronounced as perihelion approached. The sun's glare intensified. And the surface responded faster. Sharper transitions, tighter control, almost like it was bracing itself, preparing, not panicking, adapting. One scientist described it in a way that stuck. It's not resisting the sun, it's negotiating with it. That idea changed everything, because negotiation implies awareness, not consciousness, not thought, just sensing and response. A closed-loop system, the kind engineers build, not the kind nature improvises. The surface data spread quickly, quietly. People stopped sending long emails. They sent screenshots, short messages. Look at this. Am I crazy? No. Across continents, the same pattern appeared. Same switching, same boundaries, same precision. There was no hiding from it anymore. This wasn't illusion. It was behavior. And behavior invites interpretation. One comparison came up, again and again. Spacecraft thermal tiles, designed to manage heat, designed to survive extreme conditions. But even those have limits. They wear out. 3I/Atlas showed no wear, which raised the most unsettling possibility yet. What if this surface wasn't passive protection? What if it was active control? A skin that could respond to environment and adjust accordingly. That's not survival. That's strategy. As the object rotated, certain regions never activated. They stayed dark, unreflective, purposefully quiet. Why? Sensors? Openings? Or something else entirely? No one knew, but everyone felt it. This surface was not random. It was arranged, designed, and design always carries intention. As days passed, the idea of 3I/Atlas as a simple object faded. It became something else. Not alive, not sentient, but not dead either. A traveler with systems, with layers, with rules, a reflective skin that could adapt to light, heat, and attention. That last part lingered, because attention changes things. Once you're noticed, you can't go back. And 3I/Atlas knew exactly how noticeable it was, exactly how bright to be, exactly when to shine and when to disappear into darkness. As it continued its silent passage, the surface kept shifting, a slow dance of light and shadow, like signals we weren't meant to read or armor we weren't meant to understand. The universe didn't explain it. The data didn't comfort. It just showed the truth. Again and again. This wasn't a rock. This wasn't debris. This was something with a skin. And skins are made to protect what's inside, which raised the question no one wanted to ask yet. If this is only the surface, what lies beneath it? And more importantly, why does it need such careful protection at all? No one said it out loud at first. Not in meetings. Not in emails. Not on record. The word stayed hidden, like a thought you don't trust yourself to finish. Artificial. It appeared quietly, in the margins of draft papers, in private notes, in conversations that started with long pauses. Because once you say that word, everything changes. Up until now, 3I/ATLAS could still be framed as strange nature, rare physics, unknown materials. But the more data arrived, the harder that story became to hold. The object didn't just move, it adjusted. It didn't just heat up, it regulated. It didn't just reflect light, it controlled it. One anomaly is curiosity. 2 is coincidence. 7 is a problem. In one closed-door meeting, a scientist asked a question that stopped the room. If this were human-made, what would we call it? No one answered. Because the truth was uncomfortable. We wouldn't call it a probe, or a satellite, or a ship. Those words feel too small. This thing wasn't exploring planets. It wasn't stopping. It wasn't signaling. It was passing through, efficiently, calmly. Like it had done this before. That's when the comparison started, quietly, carefully. Not in public talks, in private discussions. Long-range spacecraft, interstellar concepts, self-regulating systems. Every comparison felt incomplete. Human machines are fragile. They fail. They drift. They break. 3I/ATLAS didn't. It behaved like something designed to last. Designed to endure heat. Designed to manage energy. Designed to remain intact across timescales we struggle to imagine. Someone finally said it, almost apologetically. If we discovered this on Earth, we wouldn't call it natural. That sentence landed hard because it exposed the bias no one wanted to admit. We're comfortable calling strange things natural when they come from space. It makes them safer. It keeps the universe quiet. But comfort doesn't change behavior, and behavior was screaming. Still, resistance came fast. Strong, emotional. Humans see patterns everywhere. We're wired for intention. We're projecting. And they weren't wrong. We see faces in clouds, meaning in noise. History is full of mistakes like that. So they tried to strip the data of emotion. No metaphors, no speculation, just numbers. But even the numbers felt intentional. The corrections in trajectory were minimal, but consistent. The thermal regulation stayed within optimal ranges. The surface reflectivity shifted exactly when needed. Efficiency isn't random. Efficiency is learned or designed. One researcher framed it another way. Nature is wasteful. Design is not. That idea spread. Quietly, nature spills energy everywhere. Stars burn wildly. Comets lose mass without care. 3I/ATLAS wasted nothing. Every change served a purpose. Every response felt measured. And then came the hardest question of all. If this is artificial, Why doesn't it look like anything? No antennas, no solar panels, no obvious structure, just a shape that defied easy description. But that question revealed another assumption. That intelligence has to look familiar, that machines must resemble ours. What if this wasn't built by hands, but by principles? By physics pushed to its limits, by a civilization that solved problems we're only beginning to ask. Something older, quieter, something that learned how to disappear into nature while still being engineered. The idea unsettled people deeply, because it suggested a kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself, doesn't communicate, doesn't care if it's understood, just passes through, doing its job. Whatever that job might be. Another objection surfaced. If it's a machine, where's the signal? That question felt safe, because signals imply intent to communicate. And we hadn't heard anything. No radio bursts, no beams, just light, heat, motion. But then someone pointed out something chilling. What if the signal isn't for us? What if it's not a message, but a status, a beacon for something else, or a marker, like saying, "I'm still here," or worse, "I've arrived"? That thought didn't make it into any paper, but it stayed, because artificial doesn't mean hostile. It doesn't mean alive. It just means built. Built things have reasons. And reasons don't require witnesses. As debate grew, so did discomfort. Because now the question wasn't just scientific, it was philosophical. If this object is artificial, then intelligence exists elsewhere. Not as a whisper. Not as a dream, but as evidence. Cold, silent, undeniable. And if it's not artificial, then nature is stranger than we ever imagined. Stranger in ways that mimic intention. Stranger in ways that break our understanding of randomness itself. Either answer was terrifying, because both meant we were wrong. Wrong about the universe. Wrong about our place in it. In one draft paper, a sentence was written, then deleted. The behavior of 3I/Atlas is consistent with a non-biological system optimized for interstellar transit. It never made it past peer review. Not because it was false, but because it was too heavy, too final. You don't publish sentences like that lightly. The human mind doesn't like edges. It likes smooth stories. This was a cliff, and everyone felt it. So the official language stayed cautious, unusual, anomalous, unprecedented. Words that delay meaning. But behind those words, the forbidden one kept growing louder. Artificial, not as a claim, as a question. A mirror, because asking if this object is a machine also asks something else. What does a machine look like after millions of years? What does intelligence become when survival matters more than conversation? What if the universe is full of quiet tools moving between stars, doing things we don't recognize as activity? The room grew quiet whenever someone followed that thought too far. Because if that's true, then the silence of space isn't empty, it's restrained. As 3I/Atlas continued its journey, the debate never reached resolution. Some clung to nature. Others leaned toward design. Most hovered in between, uncomfortable, watching, waiting for something decisive, a failure, a breakdown, a mistake. Machines fail. Nature surprises. Everyone was waiting to see which one would happen. But the object didn't fail. It didn't surprise. It just continued. Steady, efficient, silent. And that might have been the most unsettling thing of all. Because if this really is a machine, then it doesn't need us to believe in it. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need meaning. It only needs to function. And it was doing that perfectly. As the sun burned behind it and the data kept arriving, the question stayed unresolved, not spoken, but felt by everyone watching. Are we witnessing the strangest trick of nature ever recorded, or the first quiet proof that we are not the only ones who build things to last? The universe didn't answer. 3I/Atlas didn't react. It just kept moving. And in that movement, the line between coincidence and intention grew thinner until it was almost impossible to see. And once you lose that line, you can never quite trust the darkness the same way again. The data didn't change. People did. That was the strange part. For weeks, 3I/Atlas had been just numbers on screens, graphs, curves, quiet debates behind closed doors. But then the rumors leaked. Not a headline, not a press conference, just whispers. A phrase overheard, a line from an early draft, a scientist speaking too freely at the wrong moment. Artificial behavior. That was all it took. The reaction didn't come all at once. It spread unevenly, like cracks in glass. Some people laughed it off immediately. This happens every time, they said. Something weird shows up, and everyone loses their mind. They pointed to history, canals on Mars, face on the moon, signals that turned out to be microwaves. Human imagination, they said, is the real anomaly. And maybe they were right. Skepticism is healthy. It keeps us grounded. But not everyone felt grounded anymore. Others felt something else entirely. A tightening in the chest, a quiet fear that didn't come from panic, but from recognition. Because this didn't feel like past mistakes. This felt different. The behavior was layered, consistent, persistent, and most unsettling of all, it wasn't dramatic. No explosions, no signals screaming across space, just calm, controlled passage. That calmness scared people more than chaos ever could. Online, the conversation fractured. One side demanded restraint. Wait for peer review. Let science work. The other side didn't care. They felt it instinctively, that something had shifted. That discovery had crossed a line we didn't know existed. Scientists found themselves in unfamiliar territory. They weren't just defending data anymore. They were defending meaning. Emails flooded in, reporters asking careful questions and reckless ones. Is it alien? Is it watching us? Are we in danger? Most scientists didn't know how to answer, because "we don't know" sounds weak, even when it's the most honest thing you can say. Some tried to reassure. This object poses no threat. It's not changing course toward Earth. True, but safety wasn't the point. Meaning was. Because the fear wasn't about impact. It was about implication. What does it mean if something built by intelligence can cross our system without effort? What does it say about our place in the universe if we're not the first to send things between stars? That question hit people differently. For some, it sparked wonder, awe, the idea that we're not alone in our curiosity, that someone else once looked up and built something to explore. That thought felt comforting. But for others, it felt like loss. Loss of uniqueness, loss of control, loss of the quiet belief that the universe belonged to us by default. Forums filled with arguments. Some dismissed the whole thing as hype, scientists chasing funding, media exaggeration. Others went further. Conspiracies bloomed instantly. Cover-ups, secret signals, hidden communications. Most of it was noise, but beneath the noise was something real, a collective unease, because even people who didn't believe the rumors felt the tension. Late-night hosts joked about it. Memes appeared. Humor is how humans process fear, but the jokes felt thin, forced, like laughing in a dark room to prove you're not scared. Inside research institutions, the mood changed. Scientists spoke more carefully. They avoided speculation in public, but not with each other. Some found themselves double-checking statements that never would have mattered before. Words felt heavier now, because they knew they weren't just speaking to colleagues. They were speaking to a world that might never hear the sky the same way again. One researcher described it quietly. It feels like we opened a door and realized we don't know what room we're standing in. That feeling spread, a sense of irreversible curiosity. You can't unsee data. You can't unask questions. Once the possibility enters your mind, it stays. Even among skeptics, something shifted. They still rejected the idea of artificial origin. But they admitted something else. This object was changing how we interpret anomalies. The bar had moved. What once would have been dismissed now demanded deeper scrutiny. And that alone was a transformation. Human perception fractured into layers, believers, doubters, those caught in between. But everyone shared one thing: attention. Eyes turned upward, not in fear of invasion, but in search of understanding. People started asking different questions. Not, is it alien, but how many others have we missed? How long have they been passing through, unnoticed? Because if 3I/Atlas was real, then it wasn't the first, just the first we noticed. That thought unsettled even the calmest minds. Astronomy has always been about observation. Passive, patient. Now it felt interactive, like the universe had finally noticed we were watching. Some felt small, others felt awakened. Like humanity had reached a quiet threshold, not of technology, but of perception. We were no longer just observers of nature. We were potential witnesses to intention. That realization weighed heavily. Religions weighed in. Philosophers weighed in. Everyone wanted to frame it, to place it somewhere safe. But nothing fit cleanly. This wasn't a god. Wasn't a threat. Wasn't a message. It was just evidence. And evidence doesn't care how ready you are. In private moments, even the most rational minds admitted fear. Not fear of destruction, fear of insignificance. Because if the universe contains machines older than our species, then time itself belongs to something else. We are new, young, still learning how to leave our planet, and something else may have mastered that long ago. That realization humbled people, and humility is uncomfortable. As the rumors continued to spread, institutions tried to regain control of the narrative. Press statements became tighter. Language softened. Uncertainty emphasized. But perception doesn't follow rules. Once fractured, it doesn't easily heal. Some people felt betrayed. Why didn't they tell us sooner? Others felt relief. Good. Keep it quiet. We're not ready. Both reactions came from the same place. Fear of the unknown. Fear of crossing a line we can't step back from. Because discovery isn't always progress. Sometimes it's exposure, and exposure changes you. As 3I/Atlas continued its silent journey, humans argued, debated, laughed, and worried. The object itself did nothing. No reaction, no acknowledgement. It didn't speed up. It didn't turn. It didn't respond to our attention at all. And that might have been the hardest part, because it meant the change wasn't out there. It was here, in us, in how we looked at the sky, in how fragile our certainty suddenly felt. The universe hadn't spoken. It hadn't invaded. It hadn't explained itself. It had simply allowed us to notice something, and noticing was enough to fracture perception. As the days passed, one quiet truth became harder to ignore. Even if 3I/Atlas turns out to be natural, even if every anomaly is explained, something has already happened. We crossed a psychological boundary. We allowed ourselves to seriously consider that not everything in the sky is accidental. And once you allow that thought, you don't go back. The fear wasn't that something is coming. The fear was that something already came and left without caring who we were. And if that's true, then the universe is not waiting for us. It's already moving, already busy, already filled with things that don't need our permission to exist. As 3I/Atlas drifted onward, silent and unchanged, humanity remained behind, changed, watching, arguing, wondering, and sensing deep down that discovery had just crossed a line. Not in space, but in the human mind. And whatever came next, we would face it without the comfort of ignorance ever again. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived, perihelion. The point where 3I/Atlas would come closest to the sun. The brightest, the hottest, the most revealing moment of its entire journey. If anything was going to break, this would be it. Labs stayed lit through the night. Screens glowed softly in dark rooms. Coffee went cold, untouched. No one wanted to miss what came next. For weeks the pulse had been steady, that quiet rhythm buried in the data, the repeating rise, the pause, the return. Like a heartbeat you couldn't unhear. As 3I/Atlas closed in on the sun, instruments tracked everything. Brightness, heat, motion, and the pulse. At first, nothing changed. The sun burned brighter in the background. Radiation climbed. Still, the pulse appeared, right on time. Some people relaxed slightly. Whatever this thing was, it could handle the sun. Then, slowly, almost politely, the pulse weakened. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It just softened. The spike in brightness wasn't as sharp. The edge wasn't as clean. A few people noticed at the same time. They didn't say anything right away. They watched. The next pulse came, weaker again. Still there, but fading. Someone zoomed in on the data, adjusted the scale. The pulse was shrinking, like a signal being turned down, or a system losing power. The room went quiet, because this wasn't noise. Noise doesn't fade gracefully. It collapses. This was controlled, deliberate. Pulse, pause, pulse. Each one dimmer than the last. Then, nothing. The expected spike didn't arrive. The graph stayed flat. clean, silent. At perihelion, the pulse stopped. No warning, no final surge, just absence. For a few seconds, no one spoke. They waited, maybe a delay, maybe interference from solar radiation. They checked secondary instruments. Still nothing. Another observatory confirmed it. Then another. Across continents, the same message came in. The pulse is gone. That was the moment fear entered the room. Not panic, fear. Because silence is worse than noise. Noise can be explained. Silence implies choice. Someone whispered it without thinking. Did it shut down? Another voice answered softly. Or did it stop because it no longer needs to pulse? No one knew which was worse. They replayed the data again and again. The last pulse, the final moment before silence. It didn't look broken. It looked complete, like a task had ended, like a phase had passed. The object itself kept moving. Trajectory unchanged. Speed steady. Thermal regulation still active. Surface reflectivity still shifting. Everything else was working. Only the pulse had vanished. That made it impossible to call failure. Failures cascade. This didn't. It was selective, which meant intentional. Some argued the sun had overwhelmed the signal. Radiation noise could drown out subtle patterns. It was a comforting explanation, until someone checked the noise floor. The instruments could still detect pulses far weaker than what had disappeared. The silence wasn't imposed, it was chosen. That realization settled heavily, because if the pulse was a clock, then it had reached 0. If it was a marker, then the mark had been made. If it was a signal, then the transmission was complete. The worst thought came last. What if the pulse wasn't for us at all? What if it was never meant to be constant? What if it only existed? Until perihelion, like a timer counting down to a specific position, a checkpoint, a waypoint, the room felt smaller. Because that meant something out there might be tracking this object, not us. It and perihelion mattered. People stared at the screens longer than necessary, as if waiting for something to happen. A new pattern. A new signal. Nothing came. Just silence. And silence invites imagination. Some felt relief. Maybe the system overheated. Maybe the strange behavior was over. Maybe normal rules would return. Others felt something colder, a sense of being noticed, because the pulse stopped exactly when the object was closest to the sun. Closest to us, closest to detection. What if the pulse was a beacon, and what if it turns off? When observation is no longer needed. That thought didn't make it into any report, but it stayed, because the idea of being watched doesn't require proof. Just possibility. Someone pointed out another detail. As the pulse vanished, the object's surface reflectivity shifted more aggressively. Bright regions dimmed, dark regions spread. 3IATLAS became harder to see. Not invisible, just quieter. Less noticeable, as if it was lowering its profile. Camouflage. That word returned again. And this time, no one laughed. The sun roared behind it. Solar winds battered its surface. Still, the object remained composed. Calm, protected. And now, silent. Machines don't always communicate. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they finish one task and prepare for the next. The fear wasn't that the pulse stopped. The fear was that it stopped right on schedule. That whatever was happening was proceeding exactly as intended. Hours passed, then days. The pulse never returned. The data stayed flat, clean, empty. That emptiness began to feel loud, because now there was nothing to argue about. No anomaly to debate, just a decision already made by something that never asked our opinion. One scientist put it into words late one night. It feels like when a room goes quiet and you realize someone important just left. Another offered a darker version, or when you realize someone is still there but has stopped speaking. No one corrected them, because both felt possible. As 3I/Atlas began moving away from the sun, past perihelion, attention sharpened. If the pulse was tied to heat, it might return. If it was tied to position, it might stay gone. Everyone watched. Nothing happened. The silence held, and slowly an unsettling consensus formed. The pulse was never meant to last forever. It had a purpose, and that purpose had been fulfilled. The hardest part was accepting what came next. We might never know what that purpose was. We could analyze the data forever, build models, write papers. But intent leaves no equations, only outcomes. And the outcome was this. 3I/Atlas passed the most dangerous point of its journey and went quiet, as if it had crossed a threshold, as if it no longer needed to announce itself. Or worse, as if it no longer needed to hide. That thought lingered long after the screens dimmed. Because silence isn't emptiness. Silence is potential. It's what comes before action, or after completion, and no one could tell which this was. The object kept moving. The universe stayed vast. But something had changed. Because now, the strangest thing about 3I/Atlas wasn't what it was doing. It was what it had stopped doing. No pulse, no rhythm, just motion, just presence. And that raised the final haunting question of the chapter. Did the machine power down? Its job complete? Or did it go quiet because it was finally close enough to watch us without announcing itself at all? The data offered no comfort. The silence didn't explain. It just remained. And sometimes, silence is the loudest answer the universe gives. At some point, the argument slowed down, not because answers arrived, but because something deeper shifted. The data was still there, the graphs, the records. But the urgency changed. People weren't asking the same questions anymore. It wasn't, what is 3I/Atlas? It became something quieter. What has it done to us? Because even if every anomaly could be explained tomorrow, even if new models folded everything neatly back into nature, something had already broken. Certainty. For centuries, the sky felt stable, mysterious, yes, but familiar. Stars burned, comets came and went, physics held. We didn't know everything, but we trusted the rules. 3I/Atlas didn't destroy those rules. It bent them, just enough to make them feel fragile, like glass tapped in the right place. Scientists returned to caution. They rewrote papers, softened language, unprecedented, but likely natural. That phrase appeared again and again, and it was honest. But it wasn't comforting, because likely is a word that lives in doubt. And doubt spreads. The truth is, nothing new had actually happened in space. No explosion, no signal, no contact. The shift happened here, in perception. Because once you've seen order where you expected chaos, you never unsee it. The sky doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels attentive. Even skeptics admitted it quietly. They still rejected artificial explanations, but they acknowledged something else. We have underestimated nature, or overestimated our understanding of it. Either way, we were wrong. That realization humbles people, and humility is uncomfortable. Some found peace in it. If nature can produce something this strange, then the universe is richer than we imagined, more creative, more alive. Others felt unease, because if nature can mimic design this well, then how do we ever know when design is real? Where does randomness end and intention begin? That line used to feel clear. Now it felt blurred. Astronomy textbooks won't change overnight, but minds already have. Young researchers talk differently now. They're slower to dismiss anomalies, more careful with the word impossible. Because 3I/Atlas lived right there, in the space between possible and impossible. A reminder that our confidence is provisional, temporary. The sky didn't promise to make sense to us. It never did. We just convinced ourselves it mostly would. People out science felt the shift too. Not as equations, but as feeling. A subtle loss of certainty. The quiet understanding that humanity isn't standing on solid ground, but on a moving platform of assumptions. And assumptions can crack. The most unsettling part? Nothing forced this shift. No revelation, no proof, just a visitor that refused to behave normally. That was enough. It showed us how thin our comfort really is, how much of our confidence depends on patterns continuing, unchallenged. 3I/Atlas challenged them gently, and that was more powerful than any shock. Because shocks fade, but questions linger. As the object moved away from the sun, quieter now, harder to observe, some people felt relief. It's leaving, they said, as if distance restores order. But distance doesn't erase impact. The sky is the same, yet different. Because now, every anomaly carries weight, every strange light curve, every unexplained shift. We'll remember this moment. We'll hesitate before dismissing. That hesitation matters. It marks a turning point. Not in astronomy, in humility. The truth may never be fully known. 3I/Atlas might one day be explained as a rare natural phenomenon, a perfect storm of physics. And that explanation might be correct, but correctness isn't the same as comfort, because even a natural answer doesn't undo the question it raised. How much of our certainty is earned, and how much is assumed? We like to think knowledge is solid, but it's layered, built on trust in models, trust in history, trust that tomorrow will behave like yesterday. 3I/Atlas reminded us that the universe doesn't owe us consistency. It only owes us reality. And reality can be strange. The object didn't change meaning by what it was, but by what it forced us to confront, that we are still guessing, still learning, still small, not in size, but in understanding. The sky didn't become hostile. It became honest, and honesty can feel like danger when you're used to certainty. As attention slowly moved on, something remained. A quiet tension, a new lens. We look up now and wonder, not just what is that, but how sure am I that I know? That's the shift, and it can't be reversed. Even if 3I/Atlas fades into obscurity, even if it never surprises us again, it has already done its work. It loosened our grip on certainty, and in doing so, it prepared us for a universe that may never fit neatly into our expectations. The sky didn't change. We did, and that may be the most important discovery of all. Because the next anomaly won't meet the same minds. It will meet minds already shaken, already open, already aware that truth doesn't always arrive as answers. Sometimes it arrives as doubt, and doubt, once planted, grows quietly. Just like that faint object once did, before it ever gave itself a name. In the end, there was no conclusion. No final graph that closed the story. No equation that wrapped everything neatly into place. 3I/Atlas didn't explode. It didn't turn back. It didn't reveal anything new. It simply kept going, past the sun, past the point of greatest attention, back into the dark. As it moved away, the data thinned, signals weakened. Details blurred. The object became fainter each night, harder to separate from the background stars. Just another dot again. And somehow, that felt wrong, because we had seen too much to believe it was ordinary anymore. The origin question remained unanswered. Where did it come from? No star system claimed it. No trajectory pointed cleanly backward. When scientists rewound its path far enough, it dissolved into uncertainty. Errors stacked. Angles widened. Eventually the line disappeared into statistical fog. Not because we failed, but because space is vast, and time erases footprints. That's when the truth became unavoidable. We might never know. No follow-up mission could reach it. No probe could catch up. 3I/Atlas was already gone. And whatever it was, it had no interest in slowing down for us. The data archive closed quietly. Final observations logged. Final values stored. The pulse never returned. The silence held. In official summaries, the language stayed careful. An interstellar object with unusual properties. No mention of machines, no speculation, just facts. But facts don't live alone. They live inside people. And inside those people, the question refused to fade. Because this wasn't just about an object, it was about perspective. For a brief moment, humanity had locked eyes with something unfamiliar. Not dramatically, not violently, just long enough to feel seen. Some scientists tried to find comfort in distance. It's gone now, they said. Out of range, out of relevance. But relevance isn't measured in kilometers. It's measured in impact, and the impact lingered. Late at night, some researchers admitted the same thought. They had replayed the data in their minds, the timing, the silence at perihelion, the way the object seemed to quiet itself right when attention peaked. And they asked a question no dataset could answer. Was this ever about us? Or were we just witnesses to something else entirely? Because if 3I/Atlas was natural, then the universe is capable of order so deep it feels intentional. And if it wasn't, then intention crossed our system without asking permission. Neither answer offers comfort. The sky returned to normal. No more headlines. No more rumors. People went back to their lives. But something subtle had changed. The night sky no longer felt empty. It felt layered, like there are things moving through it that don't belong to our stories. Things that don't care if we notice. Things that don't explain themselves. The hardest part wasn't the lack of answers. It was the realization that answers might not be the point. Some things pass through without leaving explanations, only effects. And the effect of 3I/Atlas was this. We are no longer certain that observation is a one-way act. We look at the universe, but the universe may also register us. Not emotionally, not consciously, just as presence, as a system being passed. One more star, one more set of planets, one more place crossed and left behind. That thought humbles you. It strips away the idea that discovery always centers us. Sometimes discovery reminds us we are incidental. As 3I/Atlas faded into darkness, one final eyrie settled in. We named it, tracked it, studied it. We built meaning around it, but it never acknowledged us, never adjusted course toward us, never signaled us directly. If it was a machine, it didn't care who we were. If it was natural, it didn't care what we thought. Either way, the universe remained indifferent. And indifference is unsettling, because it means meaning isn't given. It's something we create, after the fact. Somewhere beyond the reach of our telescopes, 3I/Atlas continues its journey. Cold, silent, unbothered, carrying its origin with it, carrying its purpose, if it has one, untouched by our curiosity. And here we remain, on a small planet, around a common star, looking up, still asking questions. The final one is the hardest. Not what was it, but what did it see when it passed through here? Did it register a living system? A technological species just beginning to look outward? Or did we appear no different from the rest? Just another point of light, just another place to pass. We like to believe observation gives us power, that seeing something makes us important. 3I/Atlas challenged that belief. Because perhaps observation goes both ways. Perhaps the act of watching does not guarantee relevance. Perhaps we weren't the audience. Perhaps we were the scenery. That idea lingers, quietly, like the object itself once did. No conclusion followed, no final revelation, just distance and darkness, and a question that refuses to fade. When we saw 3I/Atlas cross our sky, were we witnessing a strange visitor from the depths of space, or were we, for a brief moment, being witnessed by something that has crossed far more than we ever will? The universe offers no answer, only silence, and sometimes silence is not emptiness. It is the reminder that not every story ends where we can read it. Some stories simply pass through and leave us changed without ever telling us why.